got a great episode for you all today. Overvalued players based on their current average draft position. Now, if you're watching this over on our Shorts channel, I'm going to need you to go and subscribe to our new channel because we will be posting all of our podcast content over there from here on out. We're not getting rid of the old channel. We're just turning it into a Shorts exclusive channel. It's time for the podcast to move out of mom's basement, so we're giving it its own channel. So for every subscriber, we're doing a little giveaway with this as well. When you subscribe and comment below on this video on the new channel, we will be giving one person who subscribes and comments below a free copy of our 2024 Fantasy Football Fellas Draft Guide for the rest of July. So again, all you have to do is subscribe to the new channel, comment below on this video on the new channel, and you can enter yourself into winning a free copy of the Fantasy Football Fellas Draft Guide for 2024. We'll be doing that on every video for the next month. Without further ado, though, let's dive on in. 9 overvalued players in 2024 fantasy football drafts. Well, let's dive on into those players. We are talking 9 overvalued players in fantasy football drafts this year. We're going to take our turns. We're each going to share 3 players that we think are overpriced. And frankly, I think we're going to agree on quite a handful of these fellas. But Cameron, we'll start with you first. Who is your first overvalued player in fantasy football drafts this year?
For me, it's Zay Flowers. Right now, he's going as the wide receiver 26 at the 601. For me, he's my wide receiver 31. And a lot of it just has to do with the size of the passing pie, as we like to call it, in Baltimore. He had a top 20 target share last year, 24.4, yet he only had 108 targets. And a big part of his success came without Mark Andrews in weeks 2 through 11 with Andrews. He averaged 4.4 receptions a game on 6 targets for 52 yards and a 22% target share. Andrews had almost an identical target share in the same time, except he had more yards, 544 and 6 touchdowns. He also had a higher yards per reception. And then in weeks 1, where he didn't have Mark Andrews, and then 12 through 17, Zay again comes out. He averages a reception and a half more per game. He averages another target and a half more per game, more yards, and he had put up 4 touchdowns in those 6 weeks with a 26% target share. So for me, it's Zay Flowers needs everything to go right in this offense because they just don't throw the ball much, and he's just not efficient with his down the field, under 12 yards per reception. There was only 2 wide receivers who were similar in catch rate, yards per reception, and target share last year, and it was Amon-Ra and Michael Pittman. Except the difference between those two and Zay Flowers is that their teams just throw the ball 100 times more a season, right? So that's an extra 25 to 50 targets depending on the team they're on. And when he only saw 13 red zone targets the entire season, and 6 of them came in the 6 games without Mark Andrews, I just don't have high hopes for efficiency. I don't have high hopes for targets, and I just don't have high hopes for touchdowns. And last season, even in this time without Mark Andrews, where he averaged, more per game, he was the wide receiver 26 in points per game throughout the whole season. I just don't know if he can hit that with Mark Andrews back in this offense again this season. And then you add in Derrick Henry, where Gus Edwards had 41 red zone touches last year. And I guarantee Derrick Henry is going to have all of those red zone touches or more than what we saw with Gus Edwards last season.
You mentioned the passing pie. That's the only... That's the thing that I have optimism for, but at the same time, when you're drafting him at wide receiver 26 and Zay Flowers isn't this down the field, he can stretch the field. We saw that coming out of Boston College, but that's not how they utilized him last year. They utilized him around the line of scrimmage last year. So not only are you factoring in a larger piece of the pie, but you're hoping they change his role within this offense as well. Ty, where are you sitting on Zay Flowers?
I have called Zay Flowers like one of my favorite second-year wide receivers just because you do kind of want to hedge your bets on a breakout in year 2 and sometimes even year 3 for guys. But I have to admit that I'm starting to kind of come around on the fact that Zay Flowers' floor is kind of dangerously low. We may be talking about him as this low-end wide receiver 3 or flex guy at the end of the season because just of what we saw last year in his utilization around the line of scrimmage and not so much downfield or anything like that. So I still think like Zay Flowers has an opportunity to come through as a one of the breakout year 2 wide receivers, but he also has got this floor that may scare you away. So it's not when I see people say that they're out on Zay Flowers, I don't necessarily like disagree with it. Because I get that the floor again is pretty scary compared to what you want from a guy that's near a top 25 wide receiver.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll add is I know he hasn't had like ultra great wide receivers in Baltimore, but the best wide receiver season so far in Lamar's time there was Hollywood in I think it was 2021 where he had 91 receptions on 146 targets, but he only had 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns on 11.1 yards per reception, which is similar to what we're seeing with Zay, and he finishes as wide receiver 25. And in that season, Lamar only played 25 games, or only played 12 games, excuse me. So you had them throwing the ball more with Tyler Huntley after Lamar got hurt. So I think that just kind of factors into, I think Zay could be great. And I think it's similar to kind of what Ty said about some of these guys he's going to talk about. I think Zay's going to look awesome on the field. Zay looks amazing on the field. It's just, is he going to get enough volume where you're happy week to week with his performance on the field?
I want to pull up the list of players that are going around Zay Flowers too, because I do think part of the reason why we may be talking about him as an overvalued player, I don't know if I would call him overvalued, but I think the case is there where you could look at a lot of the guys going around him and say, yeah, I would rather have him.
Higgins is right there, I know.
Right. Yep. So I was going to say, according to Draft Shark's consensus PPR ADP, Zay Flowers is going off the board. Wide receiver 25. We have wide receiver 26 on our screen. Like you got DK Metcalf, who's going to as a wide receiver 23. I would much rather have DK. Malik Neighbors or Zay Flowers. Who would you rather have out of those two?
I think I'm going to take Malik Neighbors. I think he's a better wide receiver, honestly. Like I really like Malik Neighbors, and I think not having Mark Andrews is huge, even if they throw the ball the same amount.
Yeah, I would say Neighbors too. It's close because you're betting on the Giants offense versus the Ravens offense that we've seen put up points, but at the end of the day, like Malik Neighbors is really the only guy in New York, and his talent compared to Zay Flowers.
Yeah, give me the prospect talent and quite literally only competent target for Daniel Jones. You got George Pickens going a pick after. I know you both hate George Pickens. Would you rather take Zay over George Pickens? I would rather take Pickens.
I think it depends what I'm shooting for. I think most of the time I'm going to take Flowers, but if I want a guy, I've said I question Pickens' upside, but if we're being honest, I do think in the offense that they're going to be in, Pickens has to have the higher upside than Zay Flowers does right now, but I'm still probably going to lean Flowers.
I think that depends on just what you think of George Pickens. If you believe that he can emerge as that alpha wide receiver 1 and command, a huge share of targets, which he probably will because he is the only guy. But I think it's a matter of like, this is truly the one where you're like, I'm going to bet on the offense with Zay Flowers, but there's an argument for George Pickens there.
For sure.
Amari Cooper goes at the wide receiver 27. Would you rather have Amari Cooper or Zay Flowers, excuse me?
Amari Cooper is so undervalued to me right now. I think he might be one we're talking about on the next episode, but so I'm definitely leaning Amari there.
Well, not to spoil too much on Amari Cooper, but you lean Amari Cooper, Ty?
Oh yeah. That's like 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
T. Higgins, are we all in agreement there?
Yeah, T. Higgins.
Give me T. Higgins.
Tank Dell. Watch that 29.
That one gets interesting to me. I think that's a really good conversation right there. Zay Flowers or Tank Dell.
Yeah, that one I lean Zay, but I think
Zay, but I think it's very close.
There's an argument. There's an argument.
There is an argument. I would lean Zay, but we could say maybe that has to be like a heated fantasy debates episode later on here. Last one I'll bring up though, Christian Kirk, wide receiver 1 in Jacksonville. For Zay Flowers.
The T-Law believer in me is making me say Christian Kirk. So I'm going Christian Kirk here.
This one's a little ironic because I think both of these guys, like yes, Christian Kirk is the one in Jacksonville at this point, but they are both utilized very similarly where they are pretty close to the line of scrimmage, not so much downfield. So I'm going to say Zay Flowers, but like, I don't know. That one's just kind of gross in my opinion.
I got Christian Kirk 2 spots ahead of Zay Flowers in my rankings, but you could call me tomorrow morning and I would tell you that I prefer Zay Flowers to Christian Kirk. That one I think is a real toss up there too. So there you go. Zay Flowers, just a few instances, a few guys who may be taken ahead of him, why he may be overvalued at his current price tag of wide receiver 26 draft position. Ty, we'll move it on over to you for your first player. Let's get heated. Let's make the people mad. Who's your first overvalued player?
It's a very popular tight end by the name of Samuel Laporta. We like to call him by Sammy Ballgame here on the podcast. There's nothing wrong with Sam Laporta being the tight end 1 in drafts, but the problem is just where people are taking him in drafts. He's going at the end of the second round and a full 2 rounds ahead of the tight end 3 and tight end 4. And in a world where we're seeing these top 5 guys really kind of separate themselves into an upper echelon, there's really little that separates them. I mean, the top 5 tight ends last year on a per game basis, 14.6, 14.6, 14.1, 13.5, 13.5. At most, it's a 1 point per game difference. And again, for a guy that's going at the end of the second round, you just kind of take a look at who's going around him compared to later on in the drafts. It is a simple, would you rather have a Jalen Waddle, a Mike Evans, a Travis Etienne, Deebo Samuel even, or would you rather have like George Pickens or Joe Mixon, Amari Cooper, and T. Higgins, right? And if you want option one of Waddle, Evans, Etienne, or Deebo, you pass on Sam Laporta, and you can still then get a chance at a guy like Mark Andrews and Trey McBride or Dalton Kincaid around 4 or 5, who everyone is predicting to be in this upper echelon of tight ends along with Sammy Laporta. Or if you want Pickens, Amari, Mixon, or Higgins, you're going to take Laporta in the second round. So this is, again, there's nothing wrong with Sam Laporta, the player. There's nothing wrong with him being discussed as the top tight end in fantasy football. It's just a matter of where he's going in drafts, and it's just a capital that I just cannot get behind at the moment.
The capital is absolutely killer for Sam Laporta. I mean, we are talking about him, I've seen him go as early as mid-second round in mock drafts. In your home leagues right now, he is going right around the 2-3 turn, which I honestly don't know if it makes it all that more digestible for me, because you mentioned it, Ty. You look at the other guys going around him. I mean, Trey McBride is going 2 full rounds later. Mark Andrews 2 full rounds later. Travis Kelce half a round later. I mean, we are expecting a guy who had an unprecedented rookie season to make an unprecedented sophomore leap. Typically, we don't even see tight ends make that leap in year 1, which is some people will then throw back to me and say, well, yeah, which is why it's going to be even better in year 2. And you look at Travis Kelce, they're going to start saving him for the playoffs, right? Sure, there's some validity to that. Mark Andrews, guy can't go 3 seasons in a row now. He's missed significant time. Trey McBride, he's got Marvin Harrison Jr. there now. That offense isn't as good as a Detroit. Like the case is there. The problem is I don't see Sam Laporta as a guy who is head and shoulders above those guys. Is he ahead of them in ranking? Sure, I got no problem with him as the tight end 1, as you said, Ty. But if we're talking about him 2 full rounds ahead of the 2 of the other top 5 guys, I mean, this is just simply an average draft position game. I'm going to take the better value with guys who have similar upside.
Yeah, 10 touchdowns last year, right? That was the big thing for Laporta. There's a world where he scores 5 or 6, right? I mean, because you can't say, oh, he can't score 5 or 6 if Travis Kelce just scored 5. And the other thing for Laporta too is he's never going to be the number 1 in that option as long as they have Amon-Ra St. Brown, which is fine. He can still be the tight end 1 on a season, but like you said, he's never going to be worth taking him where Deebo Samuel's going, where Mike Evans is going, where these guys are going. And when you look at your team, all you're trying to do is get the most fantasy points on your team. Well, if Laporta is projected to score 1 more point than a guy going 2 rounds behind him, and everybody else up there is projected to score 3 or 4 more points than everyone going 2 rounds behind him, it's like, okay, well, now you're giving up on 2 to 3 points a game because you're taking Laporta early. So like you said, Sam Laporta, fantastic tight end. He's got a very bright future. It's just from a fantasy perspective, he's just going too early in drafts. We're not saying he's even going to be bad for fantasy. Ty, you're still saying he could be the tight end 1 overall. And it just feels like an overvalued pick because of the other players at different positions going around him.
I'm not going to sit here and say it's Travis Kelce 2.0 because last year Kelce was going in the middle of the first round.
Yeah.
But like this is the epitome, or this is exactly what happened last year with Kelce. Top 5 pick, didn't exactly return on mid first round capital, but he was still the tight end 1 in fantasy points per game, right? Like that is kind of what we are setting ourselves up for when it comes to Sam Laporta as the tight end 1 at the end of the second round. He can be the tight end 1, but it's not going to feel like a pick well spent at the end of the second round.
For sure.
Some people are going to throw it back too. They're like, well, a good consistent tight end is hard to find. 100% agree. I have no gripes with that whatsoever. Like if you want to be the person who takes Sam Laporta, mid to late second round, be my guest. It's not going to be me though, mostly because that is some early capital to spend on, if you listen to the Fantasy Footballers podcast, so right, they call it the JJ Zachariason actually was the one who coined this, but the onesie positions, right? Typically you leave with 1 quarterback, 1 tight end in your home leagues, and to spend second round draft capital on a onesie position, who again, I would rather take Trey McBride or Mark Andrews 2 full rounds later and invest at other positions early on. It's just, it's game theory. If you want to take that risk and put that kind of optimism into your onesie position in the second round, be my guest. But like you said, Ty, this is like Walmart Travis Kelce last year a little bit, where we're betting on him being a head and shoulders difference maker above a Trey McBride. I don't know if he's a head and shoulders difference maker.
Yep.
He may be more of a difference maker, but not head and shoulders, top 10 wide receiver kind of advantage difference maker. And that's what I think it comes down to. So I agree with your take here. I have very few shares of Sam Laporta, not because I don't like the player, but because I don't like the average draft position of tight end 1 right now. I'll transition to the oldest player we're going to be talking about today. And now you're probably thinking oldest player. I mean, you talked about 2 young guys here. Maybe you're just talking about super young players. No, unfortunately, the more I've been thinking about Derrick Henry this offseason, the more I'm not convinced he's worth his running back 9 price tag right now. Now, before I pull up the fancy film that we've been pulling up all episode long, let's acknowledge that Derrick Henry is a 30-year-old running back, okay? And what I want to do is I want to read you a list of running backs who are currently 29 years or older in the NFL right now. All right. First one, you got Amir Abdullah, Alexander Armah, Brandon Bolden, Mike Boone, Matt Breida, Michael Burton, James Conner. There we go. There's a name. Dalvin Cook, Kenyon Drake. You got Gus Edwards, who's with the Chargers. You got Austin Eckler now still. Zeke Elliott, CJ Ham. You got Derrick Henry, Kareem Hunt, Jacob Johnson, Aaron Jones, Kyle Juszczyk, Raheem Mostert, Latavius Murray, Cordero Patterson, Patrick Ricard, Boston Scott, Keith Smith, Damian Williams, Jamal Williams. That's not a list of sexy names at all. It is unprecedented. We see elite running backs like Derrick Henry thrive at 30 years old. Now, I know what you're thinking. Lucas, he just landed in the Baltimore Ravens offense, where it is going to be significantly better for him than it was in Tennessee, because he was averaging only 3.9 true yards per carry last year, only 4.5 yards per touch. Those were 41st and 38th in the league last year. The big problem I have with Derrick Henry personally is that this man, even though he saw some receiving work, just does not get involved in the receiving game. This dude only ran 83 routes last year. Either of you want to guess where that ranked in the league?
Oh, that's got to be really bad.
Try 81st in the entire NFL last year.
Oh.
It's awful, okay? Do we think that's going to change when he goes to the Baltimore Ravens?
I think it might get worse.
I'm not convinced it gets any better, because you still have Justice Hill, who now I'm not using Justice Hill as an argument to not draft Derrick Henry. I am just saying Justice Hill, I'm sure, is going to be mixed in on the passing down works. Gus Edwards last year also didn't see much receiving work. He only saw 13 targets last year. He finished as a running back 25 in PPR formats with 13 rushing touchdowns. So everybody is saying, well, Derrick Henry, he's going to score rushing touchdowns. He's going to be great in this efficient Baltimore Ravens offense. Sure, Gus Edwards only had 200 rush attempts last year. So is that running back 25 number a little bit misleading? Yes, because I think Derrick Henry, we'll probably see, what do I have him satted off for? 260, 270 rush attempts this year. I'm going to fact check myself on that one. I mean, I still have the guy down for 289 rush attempts this year. The thing with Derrick Henry is I am concerned about the efficiency despite being behind a better offensive line than whatever the Tennessee Titans threw out on the football field last year. And I'm sorry, I just don't want to bet on a 30-year-old running back who, again, is going around the 1-2 turn. There are better values on guys later that I like. I love Isaiah Pacheco this year. I would rather have him than Derrick Henry. I have James Cook right now ranked ahead of Derrick Henry. You can call me crazy on that one. I have them, 2 running backs apart. Travis Etienne is a guy who's going around Derrick Henry. I'd rather have him. Kyron Williams, I'd rather have. I just don't want to place my chips on a 30-year-old running back. Like we were trying to play this game prematurely, 2 years ago when it's like, the age cliff for running backs is 28. Sure, Derrick Henry is built different, but at some point, it evaporates for these guys. And even though he's in a better offense, I think this is just a trap I'd rather not walk into. And I'll go ahead and eat my words if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it last year, 280 carries, 1,167 yards, and 12 touchdowns. And he was the running back 14 in points per game. Right? I mean, how much better do we think it gets this year? Oh, he scores 13 touchdowns. Does he have a ceiling where he could somehow hit 16 touchdowns? Yeah, he does because he's Derrick Henry on the Ravens, but that's every single thing going right every single game. Could he hit 1,200 yards? Yeah, he could, but he just had 280 carries last year and hit 1,167. So, and then, like you said, he barely ran any routes last year and he still had double the amount of targets and receptions as Gus Edwards did. So it's just the upside just isn't quite there because you look at, he was running back 8. Well, you got to look at points per game because yes, he did play every single game. And yeah, that's awesome as a running back, but only 14.5 points per game. You're just not that excited. And like you said, yeah, I mean, if you look at that list going behind him, I mean, you got Rashad White's, Travis Etienne's, James Cook's, all these guys who do have as much or even more upside, and they're not reliant on scoring a touchdown every single week.
Yeah, 14.5 fantasy points per game was running back 16.5 PPR formats last year. Ty, you want to chime in anything on Derrick Henry?
You just have to ask the question, what's his upside? You have to, because it seems like a lock that the top 3 guys will be Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, and Bijan Robinson. And it's fantasy football. Anything can happen. So maybe lock isn't the right word to use, but like the reason why Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson are going in the top half of drafts is because we expect them to have running back 1 overall upside, right? Now we're looking at Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor, and then a litany of other guys, Kyron, Achane, Saquon. Like, what is his upside? If his upside is to be in that mix of, B tier running backs, I'll call it, or tier 2 running backs, it's not worth that running back 9 price tag when you can get similar upside. And guys, like you mentioned, Lucas, like Isaiah Pacheco, I think James Cook has similar upside that can finish in that range of players. They're going much later than Derrick Henry, right? So it's a matter, and again, very similar to Sam Laporta in some ways. I think some people will buy in on Derrick Henry on the fact that touchdown machine in a Baltimore offense. Sure, that's just not going to be for me. I'd rather take a shot on a wide receiver rather than try to force a Derrick Henry pick. And maybe the best way to say it too, like, you need a historical season from Derrick Henry in order to like win, essentially get the steal of the draft, if that makes sense. Because he's going 3rd round. You need a historical season for him to like really come through here. I just bet against that for a guy that's 30 years old.
Again, I mean, you look at last season, 280 carries, 12 touchdowns, the running back 8, the running back 15.5 PPR fantasy points per game, running back 16 in full PPR. So again, I understand he's on a better offense. I understand. So the Baltimore Ravens, let's not pretend that Lamar Jackson isn't going to get his. And, even if Derrick Henry does score that, I'm afraid we're drafting him pretty darn close to his ceiling because I don't think there is a top 7, top 5 finish in store for Derrick Henry this season. Why don't we take a quick break, fellas? We'll be back with 6 more overpriced players goodness in fantasy football drafts this year. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, where it is best ball summer. There are 5 core best ball tournaments to play in with over $20 million up for grabs this summer. You can even take a crack at winning the top prize of $1.5 million in their infamous Best Ball Mania 5 contest. To enter, head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app and use the code FELLAS to get a first deposit bonus up to $250 and our 2024 draft guide for free. Again, head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app and use code FELLAS to sign up. Must be 18 plus and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-522-4700 or visit npcgambling.org. Alrighty, we are back and we are chatting about overvalued players in fantasy football drafts right now. So far, we have talked about Zay Flowers, Sam Laporta, and Derrick Henry. Cameron, we'll kick it back to you. Who is your second overvalued player in fantasy football drafts this year?
For me, it's Michael Pittman. And honestly, it's going to be a pretty similar argument to Zay Flowers. I just don't know how big of a passing pie it's going to be. This team was 15th in pass attempts last year, but they played the majority of the season with Gardner Minshew. Now you put in Anthony Richardson, and in week 4, they had a game that went to overtime against the Rams, where it was one of the two games Richardson played the whole game in. Richardson only completed 11 passes in that game. He had 200 yards, but only 11 passes, and Jonathan Taylor wasn't even on the field yet. And now you add in a healthy Jonathan Taylor. You have a healthy Anthony Richardson. You add in A.D. Mitchell, Josh Downs, who I'm not trying to spread any pro Josh Downs propaganda here, but he did have a 70% snap share last year. He was third in slot snaps, and he had 98 targets. So for me with Pittman, it just feels like, yes, last year he had 156 targets on a 30% target share, which is amazing. I just don't know if that's repeatable. I just don't know with Anthony Richardson if that's something that he could get back up to. And last year he was the wide receiver 15. He was 86th in ADOT. He's never been higher than 70th in his career. He was 45th in deep targets, and he's never been higher than 35th. And he finally had 19 red zone targets last year, but he still only scored 4 receiving touchdowns. His career high is 6. He's just, he's seen multiple, 15 red zone targets and 16 in the last 2 seasons. But now you have a healthy Anthony Richardson, who already had 4 rushing touchdowns in, 2 full games and 2 half games last year. You have a healthy Jonathan Taylor who's going to score in the red zone. My issue is I just don't think he can continue to volume his way to a top 15 finish. And even if he could, Michael Pittman doesn't profile or doesn't play or doesn't score fantasy points in a way of a guy who's going to crack into the top 10, right? There isn't that upside where Michael Pittman could have 10 touchdowns this year. Michael Pittman could get 1,200 receiving yards this year. It's a great year for Michael Pittman, has been 100 to 110 receptions, maybe 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns. And that just doesn't crack the top 10. So you're drafting him at his ceiling already if everything goes right. And I just don't think he can get back to what we've seen in the past of 140, 150 targets on this team.
Michael Pittman is such a fascinating case every year.
Yes.
Because he is the watch me get a crap ton of volume kind of guy. But I'm not going to capitalize on it because I'm athletic, I'm talented, but for the life of me, I can't score touchdowns. So there's also like a limited upside case here, right? Because he's not a downfield guy. He's primarily, working over the middle of the field kind of guy. So there's not a lot of upside there yet. It's interesting talking about him as overvalued at the wide receiver 16. I think a lot of people will say, well, yeah, he's consistent though. So I want him. Because I don't want guys who are going to be 40 one week and then 5 the next week, and I can never figure out when to start them. I just want the consistency. But your argument is more so of like, why are we drafting consistency at the wide receiver 16 when we're looking at some of the other names going around him? I mean, the case is there, right? Let me pull up the other wide receivers going around him. I mean, it is Jalen Waddle, it is Deebo Samuel, it is Mike Evans, DJ Moore is in this range, Devonta Smith is in this range. And I think all those guys we could probably say have more upside, but a lot of people will say, no, give me the consistency. I don't know. Where do you chime in on that argument, Ty?
I mean, I talked about Pittman in my 5 wide receivers that experts are wrong about. The thing is, he's never been the downfield guy, but there will be people that will say, ooh, like Michael Pittman could be the breakout this year because he's got Richardson back. Pittman has never been downfield. Like, he's never been utilized downfield. And again, he was 86th in ADOT last year. So if anything, that ADOT should tell you where his floor is, right? And we've been calling it different words: consistency, floor, in all those different ways you can phrase it. Like, I struggle to say that he can push into that top 15, top 12 range for a guy that is just not utilized all over the field. He's just right at the line of scrimmage, right? So again, yes, he's going to be consistent, but for the even, wide receiver 16 price tag, like, how many weeks is he actually going to crack the top 15 wide receivers on a week-to-week basis? I just struggle to see that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying there are guys I'd rather take that have higher upside than a guy like Michael Pittman Jr. Again, nothing wrong with him as a player, nothing wrong with him as someone that you can target in fantasy drafts. You just have to know what you're getting with Michael Pittman. And I just don't think that upside is the same compared to some other wide receivers.
Yeah, half of his games last year, 8 out of 16, he finished as a top 15 wide receiver. So, but like, you also look at some of those finishes too. Like, let me quick, read them here. You got, he was a wide receiver 8 in week 1, on the back of, hey, look at that, a touchdown, which he only scored 4 of last year, right? But then you look at, wide receiver 38, 22, 76, 33. There's a wide receiver 9, a wide receiver 15, a wide receiver 14, a wide receiver 13. Here's a 16, 12, 9, 10. Then his last 3 games of the season, 30, 42, 51 were his wide receiver finishes. So this isn't a guy who is giving you like top 5 upside on a weekly basis, versus I think some of the other guys that you're drafting around him are like, you have a really good chance of giving me a top 10 season this year if things break right for you. And that just isn't the case for Michael Pittman, who also, can we just acknowledge, Heath Cummings tweeted this out a while back, right, about T. Higgins, where all he did was give T. Higgins another 2%, or was it even 1%? He bumped him from like an 18.5 to 20% target share. Then all of a sudden he goes from his wide receiver 26 to his wide receiver 13. And this tier of wide receivers here, from basically after Marvin Harrison Jr., the wide receiver 12, all the way through the wide receiver 26, 27, 28, they're all separated by like 15 points. That's a difference of, 60 yards and 2 touchdowns. And all of a sudden someone may jump, from being, outside of the top 30 to inside of the top 15, which is just crazy. So I think, and Cameron, you can put a bow on this afterwards. The thing with Michael Pittman is he is a fine fantasy football pick. I probably will be still drafting a fair share of Michael Pittman this year, but the problem with wide receiver 16 is that he is like safety, and he doesn't pair well with a lot of constructed teams unless if you're going like super high volatile upside and you just need some consistency. If you're getting one of those elite guys and you're going to be taking Michael Pittman in the 3rd round, unless if you're building a super stacked wide receiver set, Michael Pittman doesn't offer you a whole lot of upside as the wide receiver 16. Like, it's probably going to be close to where he finishes this year.
Yeah, and my worry is I don't know if he's going to be that same consistency, because like I said, with Anthony Richardson had a game already where he completed 11 passes, where he threw the ball 25 times. And if we really think that that's not going to happen multiple times, that this team isn't just going to be able to pounce on teams with Richardson running the ball 10 to 15 times, with Jonathan Taylor running the ball another 30 times, like that is going to happen. And as the season gets on, AD Mitchell's only going to get better. Josh Downs is only going to continue to perform in the slot. I think he, like you said, I think he'll be fine. It's just, for me, I just don't know if he has that same upside anymore. I don't see him having that same volume. And I don't know if the consistency thing is going to be as big of a factor as we're really hoping that it is, having such a rushing quarterback in Anthony Richardson.
So Ty, yeah, you got him at 17. I have him at 23. Cameron, you have him down at 30. So we are all below consensus ADP on Michael Pittman Jr. Ty, we'll move it on to you for your second overvalued player in drafts right now. And I think you're going to break a lot of people's hearts with this one, but I completely agree. I stand by you. If you want to man this ship together, I will go down on the ship with you.
I'm glad I've got the support for this one, because I literally said before we started recording, like, people are going to be mad at me for this one. Guys, we're overvaluing CJ Stroud. We have to say it. I mean, he's going at the end of the 5th round as the quarterback 5, ahead of guys like Anthony Richardson and Kyler Murray, which is a whole separate discussion on itself, because CJ Stroud does not have rushing upside like Richardson and Murray. But anyway, CJ Stroud's value right now is being carried so heavily by just 2 games last year. He had a 41.8 week in week 9 and a 76 total point game against Tampa Bay. That does not happen every single week. And then 30.9 in week 12 against Jacksonville. And all the other games he played in, he averaged 15.9 fantasy points per game. In order for CJ Stroud to return on his ADP, he needs to put up roughly 20 fantasy points a game based on the top 5 quarterbacks the last 2 years. In other words, he essentially needs to win MVP to return on his capital. And yes, they went out and got Stefon Diggs. Yes, the run game should be more viable with Joe Mixon there instead of Damian Pierce and Devin Singletary. But why would you pay top 5 quarterback capital when you can get similar upside with a guy like Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy, even if San Francisco is as efficient as they were last year, Jordan Love even, who are going roughly 3 full rounds after CJ Stroud? Yes, everyone is banking on a year 2 leap. Everyone is expecting this Houston offense to really be top 10 and probably push like top 5. I'm sorry. I'd rather take rushing upside guys like Anthony Richardson, Kyler Murray. And at that point, if I can't get Richardson or Murray, then I am waiting for Dak Prescott, Purdy, Jordan Love, because I know they are giving me similar upside to what CJ Stroud does as quarterbacks.
The mobility is huge. The mobility is so big here. And the other name you didn't even bring up, Ty, Joe Burrow, going 2 full rounds later than CJ Stroud right now. If we're looking at pocket passers who have weapons at their disposal, who can give you similar upside, I think we're comparing CJ Stroud to try and be Patrick Mahomes, when in reality we should just be saying, can he be Joe Burrow? Like, that's what we should be hoping for. And I love CJ Stroud. I do. I hope he makes a phenomenal sophomore leap. But we've seen when we bet on these sophomore leap guys, a Justin Herbert who had a phenomenal rookie season, and then what did he do? He kind of disappointed on his ADP the following year. I mean, we drove his price in his sophomore season all the way up to a top 5 quarterback, which is what we're doing with CJ Stroud. Herbert at least had some rushing ability to tack on top of it. CJ Stroud, we just haven't seen as much of that from. So I think we've steamed up CJ Stroud to a price where I 100% agree, Ty. I mean, he has to be an MVP candidate from week 1 to week 18 and be the runner-up at absolute worst in order for him to pay off at this ADP. Cameron, what say you about CJ Stroud?
We talked about it. You just brought up Joe Burrow. 2021, Joe Burrow throws the ball, let's see, 520 times, 366 completions, a 70% completion percentage, 4,600 yards, 34 touchdowns, and he's the quarterback 9 in points per game. 4,600 yards and 34 touchdowns, and he's the quarterback 9, and it's because he has 118 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns, which is going to be very similar to what we're going to see from a CJ Stroud this season. It's just the way the fantasy football is set up. You are rewarded if you run the ball as the quarterback. You might not like it, but that is the game that we play, and that is why, a guy like CJ Stroud has been, is knocked down farther. That's why Josh Allen is the most valuable quarterback in fantasy football year after year, because rushing matters.
I don't understand how we can the thing I keep hearing about CJ Stroud in comparison to, I'll say, Anthony Richardson, because he is the guy who I 100% will draft ahead of CJ Stroud 10 times out of 10. Oh, well, he's injury prone. We've already labeled Anthony Richardson injury prone. And it's like, I don't want to take a risk on the next RG3. What you're doing is taking a risk on the next Justin Herbert right now. Nobody has liked rostering Justin Herbert over the last 2 years, because he's disappointed at ADP in back-to-back years now.
Yeah.
So you can say, I don't know, am I getting the next RG3? To which I now already can hear the people countering and saying, well, at least I get fantasy points since he's on the field. The best availability or the best ability is availability.
Joe Burrow.
Are you playing right? Draft Joe Burrow then.
Well, and Joe Burrow.
Take the value on Joe Burrow.
And what I'm saying is, we call Anthony Richardson. Why aren't we calling Joe Burrow injury prone? You know, it's just like torn ACL. Then he's out all of last season. I mean, all these guys can get knocked up at any, or not knocked up, knocked out at any time. So,
easy, cowboy. Yeah.
Whoops. But yeah, it's just, you know, I hate that too. I agree. I mean, there's nothing stopping CJ Stroud from, you know, tearing an ACL halfway through the season. There's, you know, even if he is a pocket passer, like I'm obviously not saying it's going to happen. I'm not hoping it's happening, but I'm just saying it, you know, I just hate that injury prone thing. Ugh, it's gross.
It's the worst. And again, at worst, CJ Stroud needs to be the MVP runner up, like you said, Lucas, in order for him to be anywhere near where his draft capital is putting him. Again, Anthony Richardson, Kyler Murray are the quarterback 6 and quarterback 7. I don't see how far or how much after they're going after Stroud. But this is like another very similar argument to, I hate going back to Laporta so much at this point, but like, would you rather have option A where you can get this guy and Stroud, or would you rather have this guy and Richardson? And when you're getting higher upside with a guy like Richardson and Murray, and you're getting arguably the better player one full round ahead of whoever you're taking with CJ Stroud.
Yeah, so in comparison, we're looking at these other quarterbacks. I'll put a bow on it with the CJ Stroud currently going at the 5'8" in 12-man leagues, at 8th pick in the 5th round, and Anthony Richardson going right at the 5'6" turn, 4 picks later. You got Joe Burrow in the middle of the 7th round, Kyler Murray at the 7'8" turn, Dak Prescott at the 7'8" turn, and same with Jordan Love as well. So we're talking about pretty darn close to even almost 3 full rounds later on some of these guys, and all guys who could be finishing where CJ Stroud is being drafted as a top 5 quarterback right now. I'm going to go ahead. Actually, so I mentioned I was talking about the oldest guy on this list earlier. I actually lied. This guy is the oldest guy on our list. I'm talking about all the old heads today, I guess. Look, I originally thought I was okay with drafting Stefon Diggs at his current price tag, but the more digging, the more thinking I do around it, the more I hate that he's being drafted as a top 20 wide receiver right now. Stefon Diggs last year, okay? It was not pretty, all right? Through the first half of the season, I mean, this dude was absolutely tearing it up. I mean, we're talking about a guy who was a top 5 wide receiver through the first, let me triple check myself. I believe it was the first 8 weeks of the season. This dude was first 8 weeks of the season, he was the wide receiver 3. You look over the back half of the season from week 10 on. This dude was the wide receiver 47 in half PPR formats. I mean, we are talking about a dude who fell off the absolute end of a cliff last year. And so what did he do? He whined, he cried, he complained, and he got his way to the Houston Texans, which honestly, I'm not sure it's all that great, much better of a scenario for him, because where he was once the lead target getter, now you have some competition there, right? You've got Nico Collins, who last year, the wide receiver 9 in half PPR formats. And not to mention, this dude just got paid as if he is going to be the lead target getter for this team. You have Tank Dell, who's the wide receiver 16 in half PPR points per game last year. Yeah, he'll be coming off of a leg injury, but these are dudes who showed they were talented, already have the rapport, already have the chemistry with CJ Stroud. You now mix Stefon Diggs into this. A guy who I'm actually worried is starting to decline. You look at his yards per route run last year, Diggs only ran 2.03 yards per route. I'll ask you both. Either of you want to take a guess where that ranked in the league?
Whoa. No, I'd rather not guess.
Lower than I want to know.
31st of all wide receivers.
Oh, no.
So I'm worried in an age 31 season where we typically start to see the decline for these wide receivers, even though he's attached to CJ Stroud, who we just talked about is overvalued. I'm not convinced Diggs is a good bet to make on a wide receiver 9 average draft position right now. Because what happens? What happens if he doesn't get fed the ball? Does he mail it in? Does he just break up this wide receiver room? Does he ruin any chemistry that could be had between him and CJ Stroud? What if CJ Stroud doesn't make the leap? What if CJ Stroud is Justin Herbert from 2 years ago and he doesn't make this astronomical leap that we want him to make? Now, is CJ Stroud set up to do that with all these weapons? Yeah, of course. With Bobby Slowick? Yeah, of course. I don't think it's a guarantee we just see CJ Stroud feed 3 top 30 they're being drafted as wide receivers. Yeah. What if Stefon Diggs has officially fallen off the wagon? I would much rather, as much as I don't like Nico Collins' price tag either, we're drafting him as a top 13, borderline top 12 guy. I hate that price tag. But I would rather bet on the young talent of Nico Collins and the young talent second year of Tank Dell than I would on a 31-year-old, wide receiver going inside of the top 20 wide receivers who all he's done is complain when he doesn't get the ball and just cause more issues, in terms of building chemistry with this quarterback. So that's my Stefon Diggs take. I'm sure he's a great guy here, but I have difficulty seeing him as a fine value at the wide receiver 19.
Not today. Jeez.
Sorry,
any other day, it's fine to use that reference.
That's it was a really bad day to make that reference. You're right.
I think it just goes back to what we were talking about with Stroud, though, is if he is going to support 3 top 25 wide receivers, it needs to be an MVP season. Like, it needs to be like Peyton Manning MVP season. You know what I mean? It's got to be otherworldly in order for all 3 of these guys to get theirs. And we saw enough from Tank Dell and Nico Collins to know that they're legit, right? It wasn't just that, oh, hey, they're just getting targets so they look good. No, I mean, they were legitimate wide receivers last season. So even if it's like, Diggs doesn't finish as the wide receiver 3 on this team, Tank Dell is going to keep him from finishing, as high as he would if he was still on Buffalo. Nico Collins is going to keep him from finishing that high. And so, yeah, if you're going to bet against one of them, you probably should bet against the 31-year-old wide receiver who looked like he was regressing last season. And, I've still been taking a chance on Stefon Diggs here and there, but but if you would have told me last year, hey, he's going to be the wide receiver 19 and not told me what team he was going to be on, I would be like, oh, I'm still going to draft him. But now it's kind of like you're hesitant about it because it's what is the upside again with Stefon Diggs? Like, could he be a top 12 wide receiver? I don't think so. I mean, maybe if like Nico really fell off, but I don't see that happening. So that's really what it comes down to with Diggs is what actually is the upside there.
And I'll say, like, I've drafted a fair amount of Diggs in best ball compared to what I will likely, have him in redraft and stuff. But the difference is the 5 wide receivers that go after Diggs in best ball compared to PPR form, redraft stuff. In redraft, according to Draft Sharks, PPR ADP, that is a ton twister if you don't go slow. You've got DJ Moore, you got Devontae Smith, Cooper Kupp, DK Metcalf, and Malik Neighbors. Those are the 5 that go right after Diggs in redraft. In best ball, we're looking at Michael Pittman, Tank Dell, Zay Flowers, T. Higgins, George Pickens. Very different kinds of wide receivers. In redraft, I think the majority of us would rather kind of take a shot on DJ Moore, Devontae, Kupp, Metcalf, and I think there's an argument even like Neighbors or Diggs. Versus best ball, again, Pittman, Dell, Zay Flowers, T. Higgins, and Pickens. I think most of us would rather have Diggs in front of those guys. So it very much depends on where you are playing, what your draft is. Are you doing best ball, redraft, whatever it is? But for redraft purposes only, there are still some pretty valuable names that are going after Diggs that don't have as low of a floor as Diggs has. It stinks because we've been talking about Diggs as a top 10, borderline top 5 wide receiver for the past 3 years, past 4 or 5 years even. Those days are just over and it sucks, but that's just how it is at this point.
Fantasy Reaper comes for all, and I'm just really concerned. Despite being in a better situation, this is it for Stefon Diggs based on how we saw him decline, it seems like, at the end of last season. Let's do a speed round here to wrap up the episode, fellas. We got 3 more players to talk about. Cameron, this is a guy we've talked about relatively frequently, not only on our YouTube channel, but even on TikToks recently as well. Who's your final overvalued player?
Yeah, for me, it's Josh Jacobs. And I was joking around with Ty. I feel like I've talked about all 3. Well, maybe not Zay Flowers, but the other 2 guys for sure last season as well, of guys I was lower on. And this season for Josh Jacobs, it comes down to the fact that 2022 truly was the anomaly. And I think we kind of saw that again last year. Obviously, he was banged up. But I'm just going to read his yards per carry, yards, and then running back finish from his first season in 2019 on. So yards per carry went 4.8 in his rookie season, then 3.9, 4.0, 4.9, and then 3.5. Yards was 1150, 1065, 872, 1635, and 805. And the running back finishes 21, 8, 11, 3, and 27. And the big thing about when he finished running back 8 and running back 3 is in those 2 seasons, he had 273 carries and 340 carries. Well, Matt LaFleur has run a split backfield with Aaron Jones since taking over in 2019. And only in that 2019 season did Aaron Jones have over 215 carries. Other than that, he's had under 215 carries. And this team now has added Marshawn Lloyd in the 3rd round. And, A.J. Dillon's still on this team. Another big thing for Jacobs is touchdowns. Over his career, he's had 7, 12, 9, 12, and 6. Obviously, the 2 seasons he finished outside the top 20, he had 7 and 6. Well, Marshawn Lloyd's 220 pounds and A.J. Dillon's 240 pounds. If you don't think either of those 2 are going to get goal line carries, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but those are 2 big backs that are definitely going to find some work around the goal line. And so when he's only had 1 season under 230 carries and is yet to finish top 15 without 9+ touchdowns, I just look at this team and I'm going, okay, the efficiency is probably not going to be, amazing. He's probably not going to score a crazy amount of touchdowns. He's not going to get the volume we're, hoping that he needs. He kind of feels like Joe Mixon without the volume to me. Is kind of where he feels like this season. And Joe Mixon without the volume is not a great fantasy running back. So I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at on Josh Jacobs. He goes as the running back 11. I have him as my running back 16. And we talk about, those middle guys, Kamara's in there, James Cook, Rashad White, Travis Etienne. There's just a whole bunch of other Isaiah Pacheco, even. There's a whole bunch of other running backs in that slot that you're just more excited about than Josh Jacobs.
I can't get behind the Josh Jacobs top 12 hype. There's just a lot of things that have to go right there. He's got to score the touchdowns. He's got to continue to be involved in the receiving game at the level that he was at on an offense that has a lot of weapons and a lot of mouths that they're going to want to feed this season. A lot of
weapons.
And you're right. I think Marshawn Lloyd is just going to play a bigger role than we all expect this year. Ty, I know you're not a fan of Josh Jacobs either. What do you want to pile on here?
I think Jacobs' values solely being, carried by the fact that he's on a Green Bay offense that people are projecting to be one of the higher scoring units in the league. Pretty similar to most of these Texans playmakers, right? Like, Joe Mixon is going as a top 15 running back at this point, I believe, too, with 3 wide receivers in the top 30. Like that, I don't think we are realizing how much we are projecting Houston and the Green Bay offenses to produce. And someone is going to, disappoint a bit. And the beauty of the wide receivers for the Packers, they're going much later than where Josh Jacobs is going. And again, we are banking on Josh Jacobs getting back to his anomaly type season. And yeah, he did have running back 8 and a running back 11 seasons as well. Those are what we should be expecting, not so much this top 5 upside that I think a lot of people think Josh Jacobs could have, because they see, wow, there's no one else in that backfield. This coaching staff has a history of not necessarily seeing things the same way as the fantasy community does. So Jacobs has a place in drafts. It's just not a top 12 running back.
Matt LaFleur has always said he believes in a dual running back system, a 2 running back system And so I'm going to listen to him on that. I'm going to believe Josh Jacobs is mispriced at the running back 11 right now. Where do we all have him? I have him at 15. Ty, you have him at 15. I believe we all have him at 15, if I'm not mistaken. Cameron has him at 16. So yeah, we are all below ADP on this one, and we are all in alignment. Ty, man, third spicy player you're bringing up today. Again, I think you're just out to piss people off today. But again, this is a guy that I consider putting on my list, and I think you might be preaching some truth here.
Gosh, I really did not want to talk about this guy because it feels like I'm on like a anti Brandon Aiyuk tour this year. But I I was literally trying to look for any other player, and I was like, golly, the eyesore Brandon Aiyuk is the wide receiver 14. I just can't not talk about. He's going at the end of second round of drafts right now. This has 2023 Jalen Waddle vibes all over again. Waddle last year was going as the wide receiver 11 at the end of the second round, and he finished as the wide receiver 22. And the season before, he was the wide receiver 15 points per game. So people were projecting even better for Waddle with Tyreek Hill in that offense already. Feels like we're kind of doing the same with Aiyuk again at this point. He was the wide receiver 17 in points per game. He's going as the wide receiver 14 now at the end of the second round. We don't know where he's going to finish, but I don't think it's going to be the wide receiver 14. I don't think it's going to be a top 12 wide receiver. I think Brandon Aiyuk is the biggest regression candidate. 18 yards per reception last year is otherworldly. That was the second highest of all wide receivers with at least 40 targets. If he sees 3 yards less per reception on his volume, he's the wide receiver 21 on a per game basis. Like people do not see like how volatile how volatile he could finish, where his floor is and his ceiling is just not that high. The only way he doesn't fall if he regresses is if he gets an uptick in volume. And there is zero vacated capital to go around in this offense. McCaffrey's back, Kittle's back, Debo's back.
Like, throw in Pearsall now?
Throw in Pearsall now. Exactly. Do things change if he's traded? Probably. But the place he wants to go is Washington. Okay.
Thank you.
And it may give him like additional volume, right? That he may not, he may not get 105 targets in Washington. He may get like 120, but it's not like he's going to be the alpha there because there is a guy by the name of Scary Terry there, right? Like, it's not like he's going to this super advantageous situation in Washington. And if anything, if he does go to Washington, you're going to see his ADP plummet because where does Terry McLaurin go in drafts right now? He's the wide receiver 31, wide receiver 32, even if I'm not mistaken. Like his ADP is going to plummet. That's when you draft Brandon Aiyuk. Don't try to get ahead of the trade. It is a lose-lose situation, honestly, for Brandon Aiyuk at the wide receiver 14. I'm on an anti-Brandon Aiyuk tour in fantasy this season. I don't think people are going to listen to me. That's okay. I was right about Waddle last year. I'll just be right about Aiyuk again this year.
We love it.
I love the mic drop. The Pittsburgh Steelers are the other team that keeps getting thrown around in here. Are we really confident in Pittsburgh?
Yeah.
Too?
They don't do these kind of trades.
Yeah.
No, and they don't. And again, then you want to know what we're going to get about Brandon Aiyuk. Then people might listen to you, Tyx, and they'll say, "Oh, Arthur Smith, look at Drake London last year," right? Yeah. Like, then no, maybe, right? It's like there is nothing about Brandon Aiyuk's ADP that I'm in full support of because I think we're drafting a guy at his ceiling with a guy where there's no vacated targets unless they're going to feed Debo Samuel us, unless if they're going to take away targets from George Kittle, take away targets from McCaffrey. Somehow filter in Pearsall as the wide receiver 3. I don't see how it gets better than last year. And last year was the wide receiver 13. So are we expecting it to get better? Again, this just screams regression to me. And it sounds like you're on board, Cameron.
Yeah, and it's every guy who goes up around 18 yards per reception comes back down to earth. I always think of Jamar Chase's rookie season. He had 18 yards per reception, 1,455 yards. Well, that next season, he had 12 yards per reception, right? I mean, we were like, oh, he's just this huge, big play guy. No, 18 yards per reception, you just don't maintain. That's just not something you keep up. And then next season, he had more targets in 12 games because he only played 12 games that season than he had in all 17 games the year before. So the targets went way up for him. That's why he was able to, maintain being a great fantasy option when he was on the field. But like you said, Ty, The issue for Aiyuk is there is no targets to go around. It's not like they're just going to appear. You got too many good players who are going to command targets for that to happen. So it's just another case of a fantastic NFL player who just, might not quite be there for fantasy. And it's not saying he can't be a top, 20 fantasy wide receiver this season. It's just when you're taking him at the wide receiver 14, you're taking him in the second round. It's just a little rich for a guy who maybe will have 115 targets on a good season. That's just where it gets a little tough.
Brandon,
I'll say this. Go ahead. So Brock Paper Scissors Shoot. Okay, last 2 seasons for Aiyuk, scary similar stats. 78 receptions, 75 receptions, 114 targets, 105 targets, 8 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns. Just over 1,000 yards in 2022, 1342 in 2023. In 2022's finish, I'm going to calculate this quick on the fly, so please excuse me as I do this. Maybe play like the Jeopardy music or something. It wasn't great. It wasn't this like middle of the road. Do you like that? Build it up and then just absolutely not go there at all. 2022 was not middle of the road wide receiver 2 numbers. Last year was, and that was on the back of 300 extra yards that he found on 18 yards per reception. Yeah. Like, again, he's volatile. It was super efficient last year. To get that same efficiency this year, I don't know. You're asking a lot of the guy, I guess.
Yeah.
I'll transition us to our final player here. And I'll keep this one short and sweet because, like Josh Jacobs, this is a guy we've talked about quite a bit this offseason. I wonder if you two are going to be able to talk me out of my pit. But every time I look at Rhamondre Stevenson, I just think I can't fathom drafting a guy at the wide receiver 19 when I like so many other guys going afterwards. I mean, Rhamondre Stevenson in 2023, it was not a good year, obviously. I mean, he was a running back 27 in fantasy points per game. He only had 4 total touchdowns, again, in only 12 games. Efficiency was down, though. 3.8 true yards per carry. That was 46th. 3.15 yards created per touch. That was 38th. Only had a 1.9% breakaway run rate. That was 50th of all running backs. Now, the offensive line was very, very questionable last year. And it's relatively the same unit coming back in 2023. And so some people will say, well, they were injured. The offensive line was injured last season. And actually, when you look over the second half of the season, this offensive line actually was very good in the run game. The problem is they bring in Antonio Gibson this offseason, who is no slouch in the passing game, where Rhamondre Stevenson has made where it's been his bread and butter over the last 2 years. Get involved in the receiving game. We saw at the beginning of last season. He got off to an incredibly slow start, only to then 5-6 weeks into the season get involved in the receiving game. We're considering him as a top 15 guy again. The big problem is when you bring in Antonio Gibson, a guy who can take targets. They didn't bring in Antonio Gibson to not get on the football field. I hear people saying, oh, really? We're scared of Antonio Gibson taking touches from Rhamondre. I'm not scared of him taking touches. I'm scared of him taking valuable PPR upside, which is what we're going to need to get Rhamondre to running back 19. We're going to need sufficient running back targets. And I don't know if we're going to get to sufficient enough when I'm concerned about how well the Patriots are going to be running the football this year, because you have Drake May coming in as a quarterback. Now, can Jacoby Brissett come in and be the team starter? Sure. They're going to have to break in Drake May eventually. And can this team pass the ball well enough to set up the run for Rhamondre Stevenson to get effective touches, to, I don't know, actually be in scoring position to score touchdowns? Because he only had 4 of those, as I mentioned, last year. I just think there's a lot working against Rhamondre. It's either got to be the touchdowns, which I don't think the Patriots will be in scoring position often enough. It's either got to be the efficiency, which maybe it can with the offensive line, but if they can't throw the football, I'm not convinced they're going to be able to set up the run. I typically use the run to set up the pass, but you know what I mean. I'm worried this team's going to be playing from behind more than they're going to be playing from ahead as well. Or it has to be the receiving work. And you bring in a pass-catching specialist. I'm sorry, it doesn't spark optimism in me. But you two both have him ranked right around ADP compared to me. I've got him at running back 30 compared to his running back 19 ADP. So maybe you two can talk me out of this pit I'm in, but that's where I'm at on Rhamondre. I can't draft him at ADP anymore.
My issue for Rhamondre isn't even like it. I mean, it's just a gross tier of running back kind of at that point. It's him, Swift, Monty, James Conner, Najee Harris, Zamir White, Jonathan Brooks, Zach Moss, Tony Pollard, Jalen Warren. I mean, Mostert's way down there. Javonte Williams, Devin Singletary, right? Like 19 through 31, there's no name there that you're like, oh, yes, I need to have him on my team, right? You can find a pretty quick knock on any of those guys. And so for me, I think that's why Rhamondre ends up as the running back 19. It's got to do with that. I do think he probably goes as far as Drake May will take him, right? If Drake May comes in and looks the part, then all of a sudden I think those the rushing lanes start to open up a little bit more. Maybe we can kind of see a return from what we saw Rhamondre a while ago. But like you said, even that year, Rhamondre is running back 9. It was on the back of the passing attack. It was on the back of getting whatever 60 some targets that season. And if Antonio Gibson's there, there just isn't upside with Rhamondre. That's kind of where I'm at, right? Maybe he can be a top 15 back, but we kind of say this every year. If you finish as a top 15 back, it's really not that impressive, right? I mean, it's the difference between being running back 15 and running back 25 usually is like a 1.5 per game, and it's just who stays healthy. So it's just not pretty with Rhamondre, right? I just don't think like Rhamondre's not going to burn you for saying he's overvalued. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Like if you don't draft Rhamondre, you're not going to be like, oh shoot, like I missed out on a league winner there. No, that's not in his range of outcomes.
I think for me, I just don't buy that Antonio Gibson is going to play a big role in this New England offense. I think this is a pretty similar debate as we had for Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks, where maybe actually that's not the right comparison. Like Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne, where we thought that Tank Bigsby was going to be pretty involved in the Jacksonville offense, and it proved that he wasn't necessarily ready for the moment just yet. He needed to develop a little bit. And so what we saw is that Etienne got like everything in that backfield. I'm kind of, maybe it's just that I'm not a fan, or I don't necessarily buy into Antonio Gibson as a talent or as a player to take away that like some of the valuable touches that Rhamondre could get, because there's only 5.3 guaranteed on Antonio Gibson's contract. It was $1 million as a signing bonus this year. No, sorry, $3 million as a signing bonus for this year, $1 million as a guaranteed salary for this year, and $1 million as a guaranteed salary for next year. And that's it. Like there's really low stakes, low commitment for this New England team with Antonio Gibson. So if there's nothing that, if Gibson isn't who they thought he could be, we could see Rhamondre just kind of take over as the do-it-all guy. But the other part of this is just that, like, if we're going to talk about a pretty ineffective, inconsistent scoring offense and trying to grab their wide receiver or their running back 1, why not take a guy like Najee Harris, who's going to be going a full round after? How about a guy like Javonte Williams, who's going to be going 2 rounds after Rhamondre? How about like Devin Singletary, right? Like if we're looking for these, not so expensive running back 1s on not so great offenses, wait until 7-8 round, or the 7th and 8th round. Don't necessarily need to go out and force it on Rhamondre Stevenson when there are guys like DeAndre Swift, James Conner, David Montgomery, Zach Moss, even who are going to be going after that may give you a little bit more than Rhamondre.
The one thing I will say quick just about the Antonio Gibson contract is last season Jamal Williams got a 3-year, $12 million contract with 8.5 guaranteed, and which is bigger than what Gibson got, and he was barely used in that offense. And then obviously Rhamondre getting paid. So I will say, like, he could go away quick, but I am a little bit with Lucas. Gibson does scare me enough in the receiving game, just that I'm like, I just don't see the upside with Rhamondre.
Yeah, and it's not that Gibson has to play a massive role.
Yes.
He just has to come in on 3rd down enough where Rhamondre only sees 54 targets this year. And it's not enough to steam him up ahead of where he's going as a running back 19, where, again, I don't think this offense is going to be in scoring position enough. Could Rhamondre be the goal line thumper? Sure. But again, that requires this team getting into scoring position often enough. There's just not enough that I can convince myself on with Rhamondre here where I can steam him up any higher than a low end running back 2. Again, I mean, you look at where he's going ADP wise. I mean, he's going at the early 6th round right now. Again, Ty, you said Najee Harris, Zamir White in that range. Jonathan Brooks almost 2 full rounds later. Jalen Warren, is he going? How many full rounds later is he going? He's going 2.5 rounds later. Raheem Mostert. I mean, guys who have done it before. I know Rhamondre has, but it has to come on PPR upside. I just don't think we're going to get there. I think Gibson is just going to be enough of a nuisance. He doesn't have to play a massive role. He doesn't have to play a prevalent role. He just has to be a nuisance. And I think that's what he'll be this season is enough of a nuisance. Let's put a bow on it there, fellas. Anything we all want to add before we close out the episode here?
Make sure you subscribe. The new YouTube channel.
New YouTube channel. That is most important. If you are watching this on the old fellas channel, you got to make your way to the new fellas channel. Not because we're shutting down the old channel, but we are posting all of our long form content now on our new YouTube channel at the Fantasy Football Fellas. What's even better is that for every, the next 8 videos we're posting, basically for the entire month of July, if you subscribe to the channel, comment below on this video, we will be giving one commenter, one subscriber, a free copy of our Fantasy Football Draft Guide for 2024. So you have to make sure you subscribe. You have to make sure you comment down below on this video. It can be a lot of take you agree with. It can just be like, you guys rock. I don't know. You could say we suck. Don't say we suck. That's not cool. We probably won't gift you a draft guide then if you say we suck for bias like that. Look, all you have to do is subscribe and comment. We will give you on our new channel, and we will give you a free copy of our Fantasy Football Fellas Draft Guide. We'll be choosing one per video throughout the course of July. Make sure you follow us on the socials as well. I'm at Lucas Wenzel, at CamLawFFF for Cameron, at Tyler_Plath. Follow the main page as well. FF Fellas on Twitter /X, DFF Fellas on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas on TikTok and Facebook.
Yes, sir.
We got undervalued players coming later this week. A little mock draft next week. We got some live streams as well. Live stream tomorrow. I will be going live. I haven't asked if Cameron or Ty will be joining me yet, but if they want to join me, they're more than welcome to. Cameron's got to work on his house. We all know that, though.
I got 1 week left. 1 week. We're almost there. We're almost there.
I would like to say that I'm a good friend of yours, but the fact that we keep getting like 110, 111, 112 in these drafts, like I feel like we need a
106 last draft, excuse you.
Ooh. Yeah, and the one time.
And we'll make it twice in a row. Come on with me.
Right.
You won't. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you all next time. Make sure you subscribe, turn on those notifications. Deuces.
Deuces.